Welcome. I'm Caroline Leland. I work for the Housing Forward Colorado campaign at the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, or SWEEP for short. And the Housing Forward Colorado team co-facilitates this local housing table with Neighborhood Development Collaborative. And so today, my co-facilitator is Jonathan Cappelli. So, Jonathan, do you want to come off mute and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Caroline. Jonathan. I am the executive director of the Neighborhood Development Collaborative. It's a coalition of 22 nonprofit and public affordable housing organizations across the metro area. And yeah, happy to be with you guys and good to see you, Caroline.
And y'all might remember Lucas, who works with Jonathan, and is usually here. Lucas is out on vacation. So it's me and Jonathan today, and just a little bit of context. So the local housing table is a network of pro-housing advocates that work on primarily on the local level across the Front Range of Colorado. We have folks who attend who are more state level, but our kind of our content, our programming, the purpose of the group is really focused more on that local level advocacy and how we can support each other in our work across communities. It creates a space for those advocates to be able to hear about what's happening in other communities, brainstorm solutions to shared challenges, support each other, and really feel like and be part of a movement that is so much bigger than each of us, right? That we can carry these policy solutions across Colorado. And so um, we've been meeting monthly for a little over a year, and it's been a really fantastic space for collaboration and mutual support and idea generation, skill sharing, lots of good stuff. And today is a little bit different because this is our first time recording. We're really excited about the panelists that agreed to come out today and felt like this topic would be interesting to a much broader audience than what we normally are targeting. And so we're doing a panel presentation that we're recording, but we're keeping this as a regular Zoom meeting, not a webinar format, because we do want it to still feel really interactive. And so as the panelists are talking, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Jonathan and I will be screening those and choosing which ones to highlight when the panelists get through their initial questions that we've prepared. And hopefully we can get to all of them. We are going to kind of rapid fire go through some quick questions with the panelists and then open it up to audience questions because we want to save a lot of time to hear from you all who are here as members, LHT members today. So our idea for the panel is nuances of Colorado's housing market, because there's a lot of questions around rents dropping, vacancies being high, but also evictions being high. And some people are saying, like, is there really a housing shortage? Maybe there's not. What really is going on here? What are the issues? And so we've got three panelists with each with very different perspectives who are here to talk about what's really going on so that you, as local housing advocates, can feel empowered to, when talking to folks in your own community, empowered by the real data, to know what's going on, feel informed, and confident in that knowledge. And so we're here to break it down so that everyone can understand. And so with that, I want to introduce our panelists. We've got, let's see, going in alphabetical order, Amy DeKnickker, who is the Chief Housing Officer for Metro West Housing Solutions. We've got Lorenzo Harris, who is the Director of Policy Campaigns for the Community Economic Defense Project. And we have Luke Teater, who is an applied housing economist and the principal of Thrive Economics. And so we're going to go one panelist at a time. For each panelist, we've got three fairly rapid fire questions and hoping to keep those answers to no more than 2-ish minutes per question, and then open it to audience questions. So, like I said, go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. If you already have a question top of mind, feel free to put that in now, and we will do our best to get to all of them. And at the very end, my colleague Lila is going to present for 5 minutes on some opportunities for policy-based solutions to these issues that she uncovered by analyzing Front Range cities' own housing needs assessment. So, coming from the cities themselves, what are some policy opportunities that we could all be working on to help solve some of these issues? But first, let's understand what's going on in the housing market. So, I'm going to pass it to Jonathan, who is going to kick us off with some questions for Luke.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. So yeah, let's see. Uh, so to get at the sort of question that Caroline's sort of posing here, and what you guys have all been saying, low rents, high vacancies, high evictions. So part of that picture is high vacancies. So we're going to start with that with Luke. Um, and high vacancies obviously related to supply. So I know, Luke, you've done a lot of research on this. I encourage folks to look at some of his research. We can maybe drop a link in the chat afterwards or during this. But Luke, and based on what you've seen, how did we end up with this big supply leading to these high vacancies? And what has that meant for rents and folks in Colorado?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. It's been really a dramatic story since COVID. During COVID, everyone was trapped inside for a long time and kind of said, I don't want to live with my roommates or with my parents or whoever else anymore. I want my own space. So there was a big surge in household formation, lots of people trying to move out and find their own space. We saw rents get driven up by about 25% over about a year and a half post-COVID. At the same time, the Federal Reserve is trying to stimulate the economy and lowering interest rates. So interest rates are about at zero. So it's a combination of really strong rent growth and really cheap financing just makes it very easy for housing projects to make financial sense. So basically, anybody who had something in the pipeline was able to make the numbers work then. So we saw a big surge in permitting. Right in that like 21, 22 period. It was about 50% higher than pre-COVID trends. So we're just now kind of in the last 2 years seeing the effects of that as that actually gets completed and hits the market. So what that's meant is vacancies going up, rents going down. And we see this, of course, like at the median, but one thing that's been really interesting is looking at real page data. You can look at individual projects and kind of track where it moves across the distribution. So what's really exciting is we've seen that drop fastest and sharpest at the low end of the market, while like the top 10% of units is flat or slightly up in rents over that time. And it's been a pretty even split too, with the largest declines for like the bottom 10% of units, and then kind of slightly kind of a smooth curve going up to the high end of the market. So that's like the decompression that is good when you're coming out of a housing shortage, where when we have the shortage, more demand than supply, then you see the low end rents rise up closer towards high end rents. And what we really saw is that reverse these last 2 years. So yeah, it's definitely been a good news as this comes online.
Thanks. And so you described sort of the different bands of sort of, from lower costs to higher cost units and which units were most affected. How's that translate to incomes? So what income bands have been most affected from the new supply? And how many people are in those bands? What's the scale?
Yeah. Again, it lines up very closely. The AMI curves for who is actually seeing the savings lines up very closely with just that overall rent curve on, it is the biggest savings at the low end of the market. What I think is surprising is just how much that has brought rents down for even the middle of the market. So among Denver renters, the midpoint for households is about 60% AMI, roughly. And now we've got about 65% of Denver's rental units that are affordable at that level. So, that's great. That's 50% of the population that is at that level. But that's obviously not the whole story, because when we go below that, it gets uglier quickly. So, despite the savings and the changes being concentrated at the low end, as you go down to like 50% AMI, then you've only got about 39% or 25% of units that are affordable at that level. And dropping off even lower from there. So like 40% AMI, you're down to about 5% of the market is affordable at that level. So it really, the fact that the rent has improved at the low end of the market over the last 2 years definitely does not mean that there's no problems there. We still have a big shortage of rental housing, especially at that like 50% AMI and below.
Got it. Um, okay, so strange COVID conditions um, uh, and good financing leads to a huge increase in supply that's trickled down at least to 60% AMI in terms of making things affordable. I guess the question is this the new normal or is just this a blip? How long do you think these market conditions are actually going to last for? And what's next, if you have a crystal ball?
Yeah, I think we can already see the end. First of all, since permits go ahead of completions by so much, we can see that permits were back down to pre-COVID levels by 2023 and kind of knew that that surge was going to be temporary. But even in the market numbers now, like it looks like rent and occupancy probably both hit their low like earlier this winter and have been rebounding pretty strongly since then. So, whether we kind of have fully hit the bottom on this cycle. I'm not quite sure. Maybe that's early next year, but we're close to that at least. And yeah, I think we will pretty soon be back in that situation that we were in uh, earlier after COVID, where we're back in that kind of compression situation where the low end rents are rising the fastest and approaching the higher end of the market.
Got it.
One other thing, the question came up a few times in the intro just about like, is there still a housing shortage here? And I definitely interpret it as yes, but we're looking at different things. If you look at like market analysis, a lot of people say like, oh, Denver's so oversupplied and stuff like that. I think that's very temporary, or I look at that as kind of a cyclical issue versus a structural issue. Just because we have higher vacancy rates now and lower rents now does not mean that we are at a balanced market long term. I think if we were at a point where it was easier for supply to meet the demand increase when in rising rents, then that might be easier to picture us getting out of the structural shortage. But yeah, as it is, definitely look at this as it takes a long time for demand and households to shift and react towards more supply. And so we're kind of just in this temporary imbalance because people are locked into leases for 12 months.
Mhm.
And it's just hard for the market to move that quickly.
Got it. Lots of nuance. I'm sure folks will have more questions for you. But for now, we got to turn it over to Caroline to talk to Amy about the affordable housing provider side of this. Caroline?
Thanks, Jonathan, and great job, Luke, for keeping those answers succinct for such big questions.
Impressive.
I know that's a challenge. So Amy brings that perspective of affordable, income restricted affordable housing development. So how are these income restricted affordable housing providers dealing with the new market competition?
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Well, we are actually needing to kind of operate more like market rate housers these days. So we're needing to advertise far more aggressively, offer concessions, adjusting rents when we can. Because we're affordable, we're often kind of strapped in how flexible we can be with our rents. So we're really trying to focus on customer service and getting the word out. We've increased our partnerships and just really trying to advertise as well as we can. Even though we are an affordable housing provider, folks have a choice, and so when market rate properties are offering 6 to 10 weeks free or heavily discounted prices, it's hard to sign up for a unit where you have to go through, just jump through a lot of hoops and do a lot of paperwork and have inspections and just all the things that go along with restricted housing, when you can go next door, the same neighborhood, and rent a unit that does not require all of those extra hoops that you have to jump through. So we're trying to adjust in that way.
Yeah, that sounds challenging. And are there differences in the vacancy rates across the income bands that you serve? So, Luke hinted at this, but are you seeing more vacancy rates towards the middle income folks? And kind of how does that break down in terms of who, or like numbers of people?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, Luke is exactly correct, and we're seeing that play out in the affordable side of it as well. So the 60 to 80% bands of income are by far the highest vacancies throughout our portfolio. And we do have market units; those two are all are the highest vacancies. Our latest vacancy list, we don't have one 40% unit. We are, one 40% unit that is also vacant. In many cases, like I said, the folks are qualifying for the market rate units, so they're not looking at these types of properties. The lower income bands, particularly 30 to 50%, continue to see a really strong demand because there's simply not enough of those deeply affordable units available to folks. We see a lot of demand, an enormous amount of demand for those 40% units that folks can't even qualify for. There is a good amount of the population that are in need of housing that don't even qualify for some of the lowest income units that we offer. So for those folks, they're going to have some sort of a housing voucher in order to get housing, and that's a whole other topic. But that too is extremely constricted. So having the high vacancy rates does not at all equal that housing isn't needed, and specifically for those lower incomes. What it's really showing is that, again, as Luke said, it's a very temporary mismatch between what's being built, who qualifies, and what households can realistically afford right now. Demand has not gone away. It's just shifted sharply to that lower income affordable units.
Thanks for breaking that down. And so what does this mean in the long term for the people you serve or people whose income makes them eligible for your housing?
Well, I think it shows that what we do is extremely valuable and very much needed still. The vacancy rates are really a market correction after several years of unprecedented rent growth. So it's important that we keep doing what we're doing. And the people with the greatest housing needs are still going to struggle. So for us, kind of looking out, although we do expect that this is kind of a temporary mismatch, and we don't expect this to last forever, it is very clear that whatever is happening, we still really need to serve those folks that are the lowest income. And so for us personally, as we're looking forward in our pipeline of development, we are looking at kind of using some of our own equity to subsidize down the income levels and the units. So as a good example, the next development that we're looking at, we could have developed more units. Instead, we chose to do a lower unit count so that we could have more 40, 50% units to offer because that's necessary And not only does it serve folks at the lower income, which there's clearly a need, it also helps us to keep the units filled. We are also trying to stay in business. We are a nonprofit, but we are trying to be able to continue to maintain our properties and offer safe communities. And so it also behooves us to lower those prices to serve the folks that need to be served, but also keep our units filled and be able to respond appropriately.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, one kind of somewhat surface level obvious question that came to my mind was, why can't you just say, okay, well, now these apartments are for people with lower incomes, but it's not that simple because of how complex your financing is and making the ends meet. So yeah, thank you for going into that. I feel I have follow-up questions, but I'm resisting because it's time to turn it to Lorenzo and Jonathan's gonna take over.
Awesome, thanks. So I guess you've heard an economic sort of market wide perspective, and then a provider perspective on how to fill sort of the gaps in the market, even though it's more favorable now than it has been before. Let's kind of go from a consumer's perspective. So how's this looking for renters, and how do evictions, which is less publicized, I think, than the news about the huge increase in housing. But Lorenzo, through your work, what are you seeing in the world of evictions? We know they're at record highs, but what's going on there?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that question, Jonathan. Thank you. And when we think about this question, I think we often try to reframe the question of understanding that 90% of evictions is what our data tells us are filed for non-payment reasons, not
Mhm.
seriously violations. So that makes me question then, well, why are people still unable to actually be able to pay the rent by the end of the month? So, and we can point to a couple of different areas of why that's the case, but it all points to economic stresses on everyday families. So, one of the issues, of course, being a lack of real wage growth over the last 10 to 50 years, and the way that it has not caught up or kept up with inflation, especially since the post-COVID period. So, families are not experiencing rent in silos. It's another part of the full picture of the bills that keep families stable. So, a small drop here or a modest drop here isn't wiping out all of the inflated costs of families, especially the families that we serve, who are often in that band that Amy and Luke were talking about, as far as that 30% AMI is not closing the gap for them. So some of the market flattening doesn't close that large budget gap for folks, and that means that that folks are at the end of the month realizing that there's not enough money for the rent payment. Nobody chooses to be homeless. Folks are working hard, but families are struggling to get by.
Got it. Um, so uh, yeah, that's it. I like how you said that rent, sort of stresses don't exist in a silo outside of larger economic stresses or stressors. Um, uh, from what you've seen in terms of changes over time, who has benefited from the decrease in rents most, and who has, not benefited, I guess is another way of saying, has the economic profile of folks that you have seen being evicted changed at all over the course of the last few years?
It's a great question. Thank you for it. So I will try to answer that and going by the order of operations there. So you mentioned who are these reprieves benefiting?
Mhm.
And from talking to our clients and looking at the picture kind of wholesale, we recognize that a lot of these reprieves are benefiting folks who have the flexibility already to be able to move to that unit down the street that has become another $140 cheaper this month. Folks that are able to pay a deposit, are able to pay a moving company. I just moved again last year, and all of these things are incredibly expensive. And for those folks living on the margins, it's not something that's economically feasible in of that moment. So they miss out on a lot of these kind of changes that are happening that we're noticing and talking about in the market. So then let's turn to who is still struggling. And that's where a lot of our expertise comes from, because these are our clients that we're serving every day. So the working class folks on the lower end of the income spectrum, we mentioned that 30% AMI. And these are also folks who are locked into long-term leases and just trying to hold on to the places that they have currently. And keep in mind that if the unit next door to me ends up receiving a deep discount, that doesn't affect the price that I'm paying because of my lease. I'm locked into that term period. So, and then of course, as mentioned earlier, some of the there is a little bit of fluidity with like where the actual biggest rent drops are happening, and some of those older Class C style abodes, some of those deepest cuts aren't happening there. But I think that that's kind of getting to what you're asking there. But and then it's also important to remember that asking rents do not also include all the fees, utilities, different hidden costs that sometimes affects a family's budget, as well as keeping in mind that while it's nice for us as housing nerds to see a 3% drop here, a 3% drop there, if the average family is about 20% shy of actually being able to pay rent that month, that 3%, the 3% reprieve is wiped out, or is not enough to close that gap. And then especially when you start thinking of everything like utilities, childcare, food, gas, it's all wiped out at that point. So families are still living on the margin day to day.
Got it. I think you sort of got to my next question, just humanizing it. What does this look like for an individual family? But if there's any other anecdotes you want to share about what you've seen for a family that's what it's like to be evicted and how it sort of plays out.
And I know I appreciate the question before, but this one is something that I have a personal view into because of the my own family history of being evicted and people in my family, and I've got a chance to see what that's like up close. But so we remember that these are not abstract concepts; these are real people's lives, and every single eviction matters. So, and they're all incredibly destabilizing for families. So they result in changes in routine to how kids get to school, how people get to work and commute. They displace people from neighborhoods and the communities that they've built as well. So it's incredibly destabilizing. And then keep also remembering that an eviction follows you for about 7 years. And it makes it that much harder to secure the next house in the right neighborhood for the right needs for the family and the life that you're trying to grow and trying to live. It is a hard economic barrier to overcome once you've gone through it.
Got it. Yeah, I think both Caroline and I have more follow-up questions, and it's been a struggle not to ask more, but we're at time for this section. So turn it back over to you, Caroline, for I guess the H&A findings, or actually whatever's next.
Yeah, we'll go into audience
Oh,
questions
this question.
now. Yeah. H&A findings is like our final hurrah at the end of the call. So,
Got it.
so there's a question in the chat from Shaquille, maybe for Luke or Amy, so y'all can self-determine. Do we expect filtering to help lower income households eventually, as those who can afford it move up to nicer or newer units because the price of those units are down? So that's kind of like a little explanation of filtering built into the question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think we already are seeing that or have seen that. I think a big part of the mechanism of the price increase being kind of especially concentrated at the low end rents immediately pre-COVID was that kind of upward filtering as people kind of tried to move down market to save on rent and not have to pay as high cost, and that just compressed all the competition at the lower end. I think now we've been seeing the opposite here, and that's part of why, like, even in this like 60% AMI range, there's a lot of vacancy, a lot of opportunities there. Is a lot of people are kind of reversing that, and the ones who can move are saying, oh, I can get a place that's a little bit nicer, a little bit closer to work, like whatever it may be, for only a little bit more money. Like, oh, I can make that work. So I think we're kind of seeing that reverse already. But yeah, according like exactly how you mentioned it there, Shaquille.
Yeah, I would just echo the exact same thing. We are seeing vacancies due to some of our folks that have been living in our apartments for decades, moving up and getting a market rate unit where they weren't able to before.
All right, great. Thanks for answering that. And again, reminder to audience members to keep putting questions in the chat. That's a little bit easier to manage than people kind of asking out loud. But in the meantime, Robin made a point in the chat about incentives like a free month of rent, getting someone into a market rate home, and how that can lead to evictions. And I was wondering, Lorenzo, if you Robin dropped her article in the chat, but Lorenzo, could you expound on that a little bit? I'm assuming that you're familiar with that, and it was actually something I was going to ask about.
Well, I think a great comparison, and thank you for the question, Caroline, could be, let's look at our own Colorado state budget a little bit and some of the programs that we actually were able to implement with a lot of that one-time funding money from the Biden administration, early in the Biden administration, and how some of those programs now are having to either be cut, reduced, or kind of waylaid, because once that one-time money is gone, now you really have a real budget decision to make. And that's going to be the same thing with a lot of families. And what sounds great now may not be financially feasible, like Robert mentioned, in about 6 to 12 months. So I would prefer to refer back to the expert on Robert with that one, Robin with that one. But just thinking of general budgets, economics, one-time boost, and deep discounts. That's kind of where my brain goes.
Okay, another question for you, Lorenzo, from Kevin in the chat, also about evictions, saying that a few years ago there was a stat about the average shortage in owed rents for eviction cases was only about $200. Do you know kind of what that stat might be today? And like how much would be needed in rental assistance or subsidies to close that gap? And sorry about my cat.
That's an awesome, no problem. Great question, Kevin. Thank you for providing it. Now, that is something that I'll actually need to get back with our data folks on, and they will be able to kind of like provide that hard, concrete data for us. But of note and of importance, I think I might have mentioned this at our last local housing table get together or meeting. One of the things that CDP, through our coalition partners, organization partners, through with Coloradans for the Common Good and Mountain Voices Project, we were able to facilitate a candidate accountability session this year with uh, both major both major gubernatorial candidates and Senator Michael Bennet and Attorney General Phil Weiser. And one of the things that they committed to was that in the first within their first term, within every year, set funding for emergency rental assistance, set funding for foreclosure defense as well. And we're talking to the tunes of millions of dollars. So hopefully we have uh, coming into power here soon, champions that are willing to take these budget items and take these commitments that they've met, that they've made to providing funding for these incredibly vital services in every budget each year. So, Kevin, if we need to find out a way to get some more, I'll be on the line, brother. Don't worry about it. I'll be taking any ideas you may have.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Yeah, we kind of put you on the spot there with a very specific question, but if we can find the data, I'll send it out in my follow-up email. Okay, new question from Anne Marie, which is I think maybe for any of the panelists. She writes, I have been told by a local housing attorney that some folks who have self-evicted because they can't afford rent are getting a legal eviction anyway because the landlord takes them to court to evict them, even if they're already out of the unit. So this attorney recommends that the eviction notice should clearly tell people if they don't show up to court, they could be evicted anyway. Do panelists think this would be a helpful reform?
I'll err on the general disclosure side of caution, that the more information for everybody, the better, as including renters that are having to represent themselves or find any type of help in related to forcible entry and detainer filings, whether at the local level. So any type of any type of further disclosure about, hey, this is what your rights are. This is what could possibly happen if you do not respond to this or show up at court, is always going to be a better landscape for renters. That's the way that I kind of see that.
How helpful has mediation been for evictions?
There may be something I want to get back to you on, Kathy. I want to make sure that I'm fully understanding the question and comparing the data points to make sure it's a strong and consistent answer. So let me get back to you on that one, Kathy. Unless Luke or Amy have other insights.
Anne Marie is saying that it's been helpful in Boulder County, so that's one perspective. I have another question for Amy. When just going back to what you had said earlier about there being a temporary mismatch between what's being built and who qualifies, right? And um, I was just wondering, like, when we think about getting out of this gap, how long does it take to adjust to that? And like in the meantime, how are affordable housing providers able to afford this kind of acting like market rate providers, to deal with that market competition for the middle income folks who do qualify but are being recruited by market rate providers. So that was kind of two questions in one, but like how do you afford this new competition and how long does it take to close that gap and shift to adjust to the market situation?
I wish I could tell you, for the second part of that answer, I don't know. We are trying to, be flexible and adjust as quickly as we can and be as reactive as we can. I can tell you that over the last, 2 years, it's been really difficult. It's been really difficult for us. We have not, we really very rarely, had vacancy. We've never had vacancies to this level. And we are very much kind of pulling together funding where we can. We're needing to look at different funding mechanisms. We just went through a whole Standard and Poor's rating system so that we can be able to issue our own bonds. We are looking at foregoing some maintenance that we absolutely knew we were planning on doing and putting in our pipeline a year or so, and looking at different ways of potentially redeveloping in different models that are less expensive. We're putting in our own equity much more than we used to have to. So we're really just trying to be nimble and smart about what we're doing, and how we're taking care of our properties and reacting to the market.
It's so tough to be nimble in a field where things take years.
Mhm.
But there's
Go.
I just
Oh,
was going to
go ahead.
follow up with Kurt's question in the chat, but
Go
do you
for
have
it.
something else? Okay.
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
think Kurt was thinking along the same lines and asking, I think, more about, do you have ideas for policy changes that would help? So something in LIHTC, something in the affordable housing ordinances locally. Is there anything that would help you be able to have that nimble adjusting ability?
I mean, it's in terms of policy, any sort of concessions. I mean, time is money sort of thing. So, I mean, I think in all reality, I think policy is, it's slow, very slow, but it has been the policies that are coming out now, talking about expedited review processes and fee waivers and things like that. I mean, it's kind of like all the stuff that we know can in fact very much help us. Looking at, parking, reducing the parking minimums and things like that, that absolutely does help developers. Another big thing that we're able to really something that's been an issue, and I'm sure it's not lost on anybody here, is the utility limitations that we have, specifically in Lakewood. It's an older community, and we are running into major roadblocks in terms of the utility capacity, and things like that. So it's kind of all of the things that we know, that if it were put into a process at the local levels in the local communities with folks that are champions that want to make this happen, I think there's an incredible momentum, and it would be incredibly helpful for the work that we do.
Just one question for me. We even gathered some other questions from before. I don't know if you just got a couple minutes. Um, so I can remember who asked about the trickle down or the filtering. But um, we as Caroline kind of opened up, we know that the narrative of housing is getting better because of the increased supply has sort of eroded some. We've seen, at least as advocates, political willpower at the state level to actually do things to make changes, like didn't we already pass housing bills? Um, but then the data is mixed, right? There is some filtering. So I was just glancing at your research, Lucas, and or Luke, and it looks like if we're trying to quantify the scale that or the amount of the effect that filtering has, I think you said something like $200 decrease in rent allows an affordable housing program to extend uh, and like help 10 to 15% more people. So something like that. So is that a way of thinking about, yes, filtering is happening. It's about a 10 to 15% sort of relief on housing. Is that a correct way of thinking about it on lower income housing? And then also, Amy, I'm wondering how this affects, like, how have you seen this pan out for wait lists, for the lower AMI units? What is the effect of filtering?
Yeah, so I guess just to speak to it quickly, I think it does, just to flag, it does look a little bit different on percentage terms versus dollar terms. If you look at like our cheaper units are seeing like 15 to 20% declines over the last 3 years. Like that's a pretty big drop in percentage terms, but that's already kind of from a lower dollar amount of rent in the first place. So if you look at it as like what's the actual dollar savings at each of these levels, it still is the largest, like for Class C versus Class A.
Hmm.
Um, but it is flatter there. Um, but yeah, what we found in November was it was still about $173 a month savings in Class C in
Hmm.
aggregate. And again, even within Class C, that was skewed more towards the older and cheaper buildings within that. Um, and I've forgotten the other part of the question, but I think we're running short on time, so I'll let Amy move on to hers.
Well, as you would expect, our wait lists have definitely shifted. We are seeing high demand for those lower AMI level units. We don't even have wait lists in some of our properties because we we have vacancies. We have exhausted going through our wait list to call folks and get folks in. Similar to what I said before, it's the higher level or higher AMI units that are vacant, empty, that we have no wait list for, and the lower ones that are growing and still very much in demand because there's less of those, as we also know. So it only exacerbates that problem.
Yeah. Makes sense. Thanks, guys. I'm trying to figure out this kind of selfish question. When a politician says, "We haven't we fixed it? Hasn't filtering worked?" I want to be able to say it's worked by exactly this much, and there's still X much need. But maybe that question can be answered by the H&A analysis, housing needs assessment analysis, without trying to have you guys answer that. So I'll turn it over to Caroline.
I can go back just quickly to something I just kind of rushed through quickly earlier was just looking at like how much availability there is at each of the AMI levels.
Hmm.
So, once you get down to 40% AMI, at least in this data set, it's only about 5% of the units that are affordable there, despite um, No, I can't find the number right now on what percentage of the population that was, but yeah, it's significantly larger share of the renter population than it is of the units available. So yes, you can say like, yes, this has been like a great progressive rent savings, like kind of across the board, lowest in rent units saving the most, but we still have major needs there. Is how I prefer to frame it.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, so Lila, I will let you introduce yourself. But Lila's gonna do a very quick presentation on what we have found from housing needs assessments across the Front Range, and then we'll have a few minutes at the end for kind of final thoughts, wrap up conclusion. So stay on till the end. We've got good stuff coming. Lila, do you need me to share your slides or do you have it?
It would be great if you could go ahead and do that. But I'll go ahead and start by introducing myself and what I'm going to talk about. So my name is Lila Glinken. I use she, her pronouns, and I am our municipal campaigns organizer. And I had the pleasure of working on a very fun project of looking over local housing needs assessments across the Front Range. And so for this project, we did write a blog post. So if after this you are like, that was cool and I still don't understand what's up, please go check it out. That would be awesome. But at a very basic level, SB 24174 required qualifying cities to write housing needs assessments. And so they are due at the end of the year. So right now we're seeing more come out, and then subsequently after these, we'll see housing action plans come out of how they're going to address the needs that they found in the assessments. And also HNAs a lot, so housing needs assessments. And I think that's like 80% of the reason I have slides is that I can remember the acronyms. But we can go to the next slide.
Can I just ask a quick question before you go on about the housing needs assessments? So as part of the legislation, do they have to be, let's say somebody already had a needs assessment, do they have to redo it? Or what is I can't remember what the actual requirement is. Could you explain that, please?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. So many municipalities already have housing needs assessments, and if they are, I think it's something like written after 2022, and I could be wrong about that, they have an opportunity to amend it, update it a little bit, but not completely redo it. Another cool option, which is what we see in the HNAs we looked at, is you can opt into a regional housing needs assessment. So we looked at 4 regional housing needs assessments encompassing most of the Front Range. So that would be the DRCOG, or Denver Regional Council of Governments HNA, Colorado Springs and El Paso County, Larimer County, and Weld County. And a lot of these encompass our big cities, but a lot of those big cities are also doing their own. So for example, Denver is doing their own separate housing needs assessment, but the DRCOG one still covers that region. So some nuances in this as well. But within this, we see a lot of consistent barriers that they're identifying, and we want to talk about them because for housing advocates, these barriers I think you can see as zones of opportunity rather than unsolvable obstacles. So let's go into it. I have 3 takeaways for you all. So the first one is that across all 4 HNAs, we see that they mention land use and zoning law reform are needed everywhere. They say it's one of the top barriers to producing enough housing, and just as importantly, enough diverse types of housing because of the limitations and what types of forms you can build. And I have a screenshot here from the Larimer County Housing Needs Assessment with one of their top 5 recommendations looking at zoning modifications to allow for more types of housing, particularly like smaller multifamily housing is pointed to, but lots of different things, including smaller homes on smaller lots, and I could go on forever. So let's go to the next takeaway. The next takeaway is that we could simplify these processes, and that a lot of our barriers to building housing often come within these permitting processes, within having to go to planning boards and present and it gets dragged out for years. So a lot of the housing needs assessments either point to something like, let's streamline the process, do it by right, have it an administrative process, so on and so forth. And we're already starting to see this with both state laws and local reform. So there's definitely more to be done, but by simplifying a process, which seems, to use the word again, pretty simple, we could have a lot of change. And I'm going to go into our last takeaway, which I think is perhaps one of the areas where, as advocates, we have the most power. And this is an obstacle we see everywhere, is that folks will show up within these long processes and have a lot of opposition. And these folks are often unrepresentative of those who need the housing the most. So younger people, renters, the likes. And so you see in this slide, there's two different charts. The one with the purple bars is from the Colorado Springs Housing Needs Assessment, and it's a survey results that they sent out to many, many residents, and they found that about 60% were in support of more diverse types of housing, and a much smaller percentage are against. And this is what we see overall across the state and all these communities written up in each HNA, things like this. And we know that of these folks, oftentimes they are older homeowners with housing stability who have the time and energy to show up to these very intensive processes and express their discontent, when we know that renters are a large percentage of the population not being represented, and they're also most likely to be dissatisfied. And so that's what that second chart is. And there's a lot of opportunity here through effective organizing, getting representative community members out there. Over 60% of us, as these purple charts saying, and also state level change is another way to really circumvent this in some sense. And this is, like I said, those are the three takeaways from each HNA that are consistently identified. And I'm really excited to see, as these housing action plans come out and the rest of the state HNAs, to see how this narrative continues. But biggest takeaway is lots of room for improvement, and we have the advocacy tools to do it.
Love that. Thank you, Lila. So it's 1 o'clock, but for folks who are able to stay on for 2 more minutes, any kind of final like wrap up thoughts, final conclusions, especially for our panelists, any last words that you want to leave us with? David, go ahead.
Yeah, so it was, I very much appreciate all of the information that we got today. This was incredibly useful and interesting, and to really hear what is working and what isn't working was very interesting, because I think a lot of us for a long time have thought like, oh yeah, 80 AMI affordability, that's like a great thing. And all of a sudden it's like 80 AMI is killing you guys over in the affordable housing community, and you're massively short on your 40 AMI stock. And so just getting that and hearing that is like really useful in thinking about how we advocate going forward. So I just wanted to thank you.
Anyone else? Open floor for final reflections. It's a lot to process.
I just want to say thank you all for being here and for being interested in this and the work that you all do. It's really you carrying on this message and kind of giving folks what is really happening is going to make all the difference. So appreciate you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Amy. Robin, go ahead.
I knew there was no way that you wouldn't have a question, Robin.
No, well, I thought this was the observation portion, but I also just want to thank all the panelists, and Luke, definitely appreciated my article cites your data that you wrote with Matt. So appreciate the work that you do that we all can build upon. I guess one thing that it makes me think about is, to the point about the lag in policy and markets, I think that, the state has put a fairly large amount of effort into subsidizing 100% and above AVMI housing. I don't think the case was very strong for it, even when they did it. It's way less strong even now. And I think that, knowing though that things, and, I often joke with inclusionary policies that, 50 is the new 80. The occupations that used to be at 80% of AMI are now at 50% of AMI. And so some of this is temporary. I mean, certainly I think 60% of AMI will become in play more, but I don't know that 80%, the way that our AMI scale grows, 80% has been above market median for a while. And so we should really have some conversations about when and why we should ever be subsidizing at that level. And I think in some cases, the case is being made that the market just isn't, even if that is market, the market needs help because it's such a bad market. But that's a different reason than doing it, because there's a shortage of units at that AMI. And I just think, to the extent we have a hard conversation about where these AMI investments happen in policy, I think there's a real mismatch between what you all talked about today and, the middle income housing authorities work and some of the other, efforts to do property tax abatement at 100% above of AMI, when we're not even doing it universally below 60. So just throwing that out there for like a future conversation.
Great comments.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks everyone else for being here. This was just really valuable insights, and yeah, thank you all for your time. Thanks for your engagement. And looking forward to hopefully seeing all of you at the next meeting.